The laugh that rain was falling hard on the busy streets of San Francisco that evening. Cars honked as people ran across puddles, trying to get home. Sundar Pichai stood quietly near the corner of a restaurant. He was dressed simply, in a plain shirt and trousers, holding a small notebook under his arm to shield it from the rain. His shoes were wet, his socks cold. He looked up at the warm lights of the restaurant. Inside, people laughed and talked loudly, eating expensive food. He hesitated at the door. Something inside him was nervous, though he couldn't explain why. Maybe because he had grown up far away from all of this, in a small house in India where his mother cooked on a single stove and his father rode a scooter to work. Maybe because no matter how far he had come in his career, part of him still felt like that boy who used to stand in line for hours just to buy one book. Finally, he pushed the door and stepped inside. The restaurant was bright, filled with the smell of roasted chicken and garlic. The sound of clinking glasses and laughter filled the air. People glanced at him for a moment but quickly turned back to their own conversations. Sundar stood there, waiting to be seated. A tall young waiter with slicked hair noticed him and came over, holding a menu in one hand and a fake smile on his face. "Good evening," the waiter said, though his tone didn't sound warm. "Do you have a reservation?" Sundar shook his head. "No, I just need a table for one." The waiter looked him up and down, pausing at Sundar's worn shoes and damp trousers. Then he chuckled, though he tried to cover it with a cough. "Well, we're very full tonight," the waiter said, "but I guess we can find something for you. Follow me." As Sundar walked behind him, he noticed the waiter glancing back and smirking at another waiter who was polishing glasses. They both smiled as if sharing some private joke. Sundar's face felt hot. He thought of turning around and walking out, but he didn't. He had learned long ago that walking away from discomfort didn't help. The waiter led him to a small table near the kitchen door, far from the beautiful view of the street. Sundar sat down and looked at the menu quietly. The prices were high. He didn't mind that he could afford it, but he thought of how many dinners his mother could cook with just the cost of one plate here. When the waiter came back, Sundar ordered the simplest dish on the menu and a glass of water. The waiter raised an eyebrow, as though he had expected Sundar to order something grand. He didn't write the order down and simply walked away. Sundar noticed him whispering something to the other waiter. Then they both laughed. Something in Sundar's chest tightened. He wondered why the waiter was being unkind. He had done nothing wrong. He sat there, hands folded, and tried to ignore the sound of their laughter. But memories flooded his mind, memories of being laughed at in school because his lunchbox was empty some days, because his shoes were torn, because he spoke softly. He thought of the nights his father would bring home just enough food for everyone, never eating until Sundar and his brother had eaten. He thought of the time his mother sold her wedding bangles so he could go to college. He thought of how hard he had worked, how many nights he stayed awake just to learn. And now, even here, after everything, someone was still laughing at him. The food arrived. The waiter placed the plate on the table. Without looking at him, the chicken was dry and the vegetables cold, but Sundar ate it slowly, thinking. He watched the other tables, people smiling, couples holding hands, a father feeding his little daughter. The waiter walked by him several times, never stopping to ask if he needed anything, never bringing more water. Then, as Sundar finished his meal and reached for his wallet, he heard the waiter say something louder this time. To another waiter, "Can you believe he ordered the cheapest thing on the menu? And look at him, sitting there like he owns the place. What a joke." The words cut through Sundar like a knife. He froze, wallet in hand. He could feel everyone's eyes on him now, but then, something inside him shifted. He took a deep breath and stood up. He walked to the counter to pay, because the waiter hadn't even brought him the bill. The young woman at the counter smiled kindly at him. He handed her his card, and while waiting, he reached into his pocket and pulled out another small envelope he always carried. The waiter came over, finally, to take the card from the woman. Sundar looked at him calmly and said, "Thank you for your service." The waiter rolled his eyes and muttered under his breath, "Sure." The woman handed Sundar a receipt. He signed it, then quietly took out a pen and wrote something on the back of the receipt. He placed the receipt inside the envelope, along with something else, and set it on the counter. Then he turned and walked out of the restaurant, leaving the envelope there. As the door closed behind him, the waiter snatched up the envelope and opened it. Inside was a stack of $100 bills, and a note. The note said, "You never know who you're serving. Always be kind. Everyone is fighting a battle you cannot see." The waiter's hands shook as he counted the money. It was more than he made in 2 months. He looked out the window and saw Sundar walking away in the rain, his head held high. But Sundar didn't know that someone else had seen everything too. Someone sitting at another table had watched how the waiter treated him, and how Sundar had responded, and that someone was about to change Sundar's life in a way no one expected. The next morning Sundar woke up to a message on his phone. It simply said, "We need to talk. I saw what you did last night," and the number was one he didn't recognize. He stared at the message, feeling a strange mix of fear and curiosity. Who was watching him? He typed back, "Who is this?" There was no answer. Just 3 dots on the screen. Blinking. Waiting. And then the dots stopped, and the phone went silent. Asterisk the stranger who knew too much morning after the strange dinner. The rain had stopped, but the sky was still gray and heavy. Sundar sat at the small wooden table in his apartment, staring at his phone. The message from last night was still there on the screen. "We need to talk. I saw what you did last night." He kept reading the words over and over, feeling his stomach twist. The number was unknown, no name attached. He thought about ignoring it, pretending it never happened. After all, he had done nothing wrong. He had treated the waiter with kindness, even when he didn't deserve it. But something about the tone of the message, the quiet certainty of it, unsettled him. Whoever it was hadn't just noticed what he did. They understood it, and that scared him more than he wanted to admit. He set the phone down, trying to focus on the day ahead, but his mind kept drifting back to the stranger. Who had seen him? The waiter. No, the waiter wouldn't send a message like that. Someone else in the restaurant. Why didn't they just come up to him if they wanted to talk? His phone buzzed. Again, another message. "You can meet me at the park, noon, by the old fountain. Don't bring anyone." Sundar's first instinct was to say no. He didn't like games, but something inside him, a quiet voice he had learned to trust over the years, told him this meeting mattered. So at 11:30, he put on a clean shirt and stepped outside. The streets were busy, full of people walking quickly, holding coffee cups, checking their watches. Sundar walked slower than them, his mind heavy. Every sound around him felt louder than usual. Horns blaring, shoes clicking on the pavement, someone shouting into a phone. He kept glancing at his own phone, but no more messages came. By the time he reached the park, his hands were damp, and his heart was beating too fast. The fountain was at the center of the park, old and cracked, the water barely trickling out. It was quiet here. A few pigeons fluttered nearby, and an old man sat on a bench reading a newspaper. Sundar stood by the fountain, scanning the park. Who was he looking for? Everyone seemed normal. Then he heard a voice behind him. "You really are as calm as they say. Even when you're nervous, you stand straight. You breathe slow. I respect that." Sundar turned. Sitting on a bench under a tree was a man wearing a black coat and a scarf, even though it wasn't cold. His face was partly hidden by the shadows, but his eyes were sharp, studying Sundar like he already knew everything about him. Sundar walked over, cautious. "Are you the one who messaged me?" The man nodded. "Sit down." Sundar hesitated, then sat on the edge of the bench. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Sundar could hear the water dripping from the fountain, the faint sound of a dog barking somewhere far away. Finally, the man reached into his coat and pulled out a small photograph. He held it out. "You dropped this once," he said. Sundar took the photo and looked at it. It was a faded picture of him as a boy, standing with his parents and brother, in front of their old house in India. He had kept it in his notebook for years. But how did this stranger have it? "Where did you get this?" Sundar asked, his voice tighter now. The man smiled faintly. "I was at the restaurant last night. I saw everything. The way they laughed at you. The way you didn't lose your temper. And then, the envelope." Sundar's fingers gripped the photo. "So what do you want?" The man leaned forward, his eyes dark and serious now. "I want you to understand something. The waiter didn't just laugh because of who you are. He laughed because of what you remind him of. Weakness, humility, things he doesn't understand. But you remind me of someone who can change things, and I've been looking for someone like that for a long time." Sundar frowned, confused. "Change what?" The man didn't answer right away. Instead, he opened a small leather folder and slid it across the bench to Sundar. "Inside are names, dates, numbers, people who smile in public but destroy lives in private, people who think kindness is weakness. I've been collecting these for years. But I can't do anything alone. I need someone who understands what it feels like to be looked down on. Someone who has been there and still chose to be better." Sundar stared at the folder, his pulse quickening. "Why me?" The man chuckled softly. "Because you tipped him anyway. You walked out without anger. And because of that, you embarrassed every person in that room. And you did it without even raising your voice. That's power most people don't have." The silence stretched between them. Sundar felt the weight of the folder like a stone in his lap. He opened it slowly. Inside were photographs of powerful men and women in expensive suits, newspaper clippings about scandals never exposed, bank statements showing hidden accounts. Every page felt heavier than the last. He looked up at the man, feeling a strange mix of fear and resolve. "You're asking me to take these people down?" The man smiled faintly again. "I'm not asking. I'm offering you the choice. But be careful. Once you open this door, you can't close it. People will come after you. But if you say no, I'll understand. You can go back to your quiet life, and no one will know." Sundar closed the folder and placed it back on the bench. He stood up. His heart was pounding in his ears now, but his face stayed calm. "Why should I trust you?" he asked. The man leaned back, looking at him with something like admiration. "You shouldn't. Trust yourself. That's enough." Before Sundar could say more, The man stood and walked away, disappearing into the trees. Sundar stood there for a long time, staring down at the folder still sitting on the bench. He reached for his phone and opened it. There was another message, waiting. Check your notebook. I left you something. His breath caught. He opened his bag, pulled out his notebook, and flipped through the pages. There, tucked between two sheets, was another photograph. It showed the same waiter from last night, but this time, he was standing outside the restaurant, arguing with someone in a dark alley. The waiter's face was hard, his fists clenched, and behind him, barely visible, was a man in a black coat. Sundar's hands trembled slightly as he looked closer. There was something written on the back of the photo. He's just the beginning. Sundar closed his notebook and looked around. The park felt colder now, the sky darker. He didn't know what he had just been pulled into, but deep down, he knew this wasn't about just one dinner anymore. This was bigger. His phone buzzed one last time. A final message appeared on the screen. Rooftop of the old library. Bring the folder, or don't, your choice. Sundar stared at the message. His reflection in the phone screen looked unfamiliar now, like someone else was staring back. He slipped the phone into his pocket, picked up the folder, and walked out of the park. Behind him, the old man on the bench slowly lowered his newspaper and watched him go. Then the old man smiled faintly, whispering to himself, "Let's see what you're made of." The rooftop decision city was quiet at midnight, though the silence felt heavy rather than peaceful. The streets below were mostly empty now, except for the occasional car that slid past, its headlights cutting through the darkness. Sundar stood at the base of the old library, staring up at the rooftop above him. His breath came out in thin white clouds in the cold night air. The folder felt heavier in his hand than it had all day. He didn't know why he was here. He kept telling himself he should just walk away, go home, forget the strange man and his cryptic words. But something inside him, the same quiet resolve, that had carried him through every humiliation, every doubt, every obstacle of his life, wouldn't let him leave. He felt as though his entire life had been leading to this moment, though he couldn't yet explain why. He pushed the door open and stepped inside the library. It smelled like old paper and dust. The lights flickered faintly. The stairwell to the roof was narrow and steep. Each step echoed as he climbed, the sound of his shoes striking the concrete mingling with the faint thump of his own heart. When he reached the top, he paused at the door to the roof. His fingers hovered over the handle for a moment. His mind flashed with memories, his mother's gentle hands braiding his hair when he was a boy, his father's quiet pride when he first got into college, the sting of laughter from classmates who thought he would never amount to anything. And then, he opened the door. The rooftop stretched out in front of him, bathed in silver moonlight. The wind was sharp and cold here, tugging at his clothes. From up here, he could see the city glowing below, endless lights twinkling against the dark sky. And there, standing at the edge of the roof, was the man in the black coat. The man didn't turn. When Sundar stepped onto the roof, he simply spoke, his voice carried by the wind. "You came. That's a good start." Sundar walked closer, the folder pressed tightly to his chest. "I don't understand what you want from me," he said, quietly. "Why me? Why this?" The man finally turned. His face was still partly hidden by the shadow of his coat collar, but his eyes gleamed sharply in the moonlight. He motioned for Sundar to follow him to a small table set up in the middle of the roof. There was nothing on it except a single envelope and a glass of water. Sit. The man said. Sundar sat slowly, his shoulders stiff, every nerve in his body alert. The man remained standing, looking down at him. "You ask why you," the man said, his voice calm, deliberate. "Because I've watched hundreds of men like that waiter. Men who laugh because they think it makes them strong. Men who crush others because they're afraid of being small. But very rarely do I see someone like you. Someone who has been crushed, yet refuses to crush others. Someone who has been humiliated, yet carries himself with quiet dignity. You don't fight the way they do, but you still win, and that frightens them. It also frightens people like me." The words cut through Sundar more deeply than he expected. He stayed quiet, unsure what to say. The man reached for the envelope on the table and slid it toward Sundar. "Inside," he said, "is the name of the man who owns the restaurant you visited last night. He's not just cruel to waiters and customers. He launders money, exploits workers, destroys families. I've tried to bring him down myself before, but he's slippery, protected, untouchable, or so he believes." Sundar stared at the envelope, his hands resting motionless on the folder in his lap. "You could help me expose him," the man continued. "Your position, your reputation, your influence, it gives you access I don't have. Together, we could end him and more like him, one by one." Sundar looked up sharply then, his voice quiet but steady. "And what happens after? If I start pulling at these threads, what happens to me?" The man tilted his head slightly, as though measuring the weight of Sundar's question. "You'll lose things," he said simply. "Friends, comfort, maybe even safety. But you'll gain something they can't ever take from you, the knowledge that you didn't turn away when you could have. that you didn't just walk past injustice because it was easier. Spirit. Chest tightened. The memories of the waiter's mocking laugh came rushing back to him, but louder still were older memories of his father quietly paying a neighbor's hospital bill even though it meant skipping meals for weeks, of his mother giving away her last shawl to a woman who was shivering in the street. His family had taught him that kindness mattered even when no one was watching, but now someone was watching and waiting. He reached for the envelope but stopped halfway. He looked the man in the eye. And if I say no? The man didn't flinch. Then, you go back downstairs, you live your life. No shame in that. Not everyone is meant to carry this weight. I'll find someone else. Sundar's fingers hovered over the envelope, the wind cold against his skin. The city stretched endlessly below, and in that moment he felt both impossibly small and impossibly powerful at the same time. He took a deep breath, then slowly pulled the envelope toward him. The man's mouth curved into the faintest smile, though his eyes remained hard and sharp. Good, the man said quietly. But before Sundar could open the envelope, a sudden sound behind them made both of them spin around. The rooftop door slammed open. A figure in a dark hoodie stepped onto the roof, holding something that gleamed faintly in the moonlight, a metal pipe. The figure moved quickly, shouting something Sundar couldn't quite hear over the wind. Then the pipe swung toward the table, knocking it over, shattering the glass of water. The envelope flew out of Sundar's hands, sliding across the roof toward the edge. The man in the coat lunged at the figure, but the figure was fast, too fast. He slammed the man back against the wall, pinning him there. Sundar froze for a second, his mind racing, then dropped to his knees, crawling toward the envelope before it could blow away. He grabbed it just as it teetered at the edge. When he turned back, the man in the coat was on the ground, groaning, and the hooded figure was running toward the door. But just before disappearing down the stairs, the figure stopped, turned his head slightly, and shouted toward Sundar. You don't know what you're getting into. Walk away while you still can. Then he was gone, the door slamming shut behind him. The wind howled over the rooftop. The man in the coat lay against the wall, breathing heavily, a dark stain spreading on his sleeve. Sundar stood frozen, clutching the envelope tightly in his hand, his own breath ragged now. He looked down at the envelope and slowly turned it over. Written on the back, in hurried black ink, was a single line he hadn't seen before. If you open this, you can't go back. His fingers trembled as he slid his thumb under the flap of the envelope. He glanced at the man in the coat, who met his gaze and gave a faint, approving nod, despite the pain in his eyes. And then Sundar opened the envelope. Inside was a single name, written in sharp, black letters. He stared at it, feeling the weight of what he had just chosen settle into his chest. Then, from somewhere below, another door banged open. Footsteps began climbing the stairwell again, louder this time. More of them. Sundar looked at the man in the coat. The man's face hardened, and he whispered only one word, run. The chase in the shadows' footsteps grew louder, echoing up the narrow stairwell like a drumbeat of warning. Sundar froze for only a second, but it was enough to feel the full weight of his decision pressing down on him. The envelope in his hand felt as though it was burning through his fingers. The name inside it, those 5 letters written in dark ink, already seared into his mind. He couldn't unsee it now. He couldn't unseize it that the man in the coat hissed through clenched teeth, his voice sharp despite the pain. Run, Sundar, now, and don't look back. Sundar's eyes flicked to the rooftop door, then back to the man. The stranger's face was pale, his sleeve dark with blood, yet his eyes still glimmered with the same strange, quiet authority he'd carried all night. What about you? Sundar asked, though his voice was already breaking with urgency. The man shook his head, a faint grim smile tugging at the corner of his lips. I've bought you enough time, don't waste it. The footsteps turned into voices, now more than one, harsh and commanding. Go, the man barked. Sundar didn't wait to hear more. He tucked the envelope deep inside his jacket, turned, and bolted toward the far end of the rooftop. There, he saw another door, smaller, rusted, almost invisible against the stone wall. He pushed it open and stumbled into darkness. The stairwell here was older, quieter. He could hear the chaos on the main stairs behind him, heavy boots slamming the steps, shouts bouncing off the walls. But here, the air was thick and still. He moved quickly but carefully, his hands sliding along the cold metal railing to steady himself as he descended every few seconds. He glanced over his shoulder, half expecting the door above him to burst open. But it didn't. Not yet. When he finally reached the bottom, he pushed through another door and emerged into an alley. Behind the library, the smell of damp brick and garbage hit him immediately, and a thin fog curled around the streetlights. The city beyond the alley still slept, but here, in this narrow strip of shadow, the world felt alive with danger. He didn't stop to catch his breath. He turned left and started walking fast, keeping his head down, trying to look like just another man out late at night. But his ears stayed sharp, straining to catch any sound that didn't belong. As he walked, his thoughts raced. The name in the envelope, the man who owned the restaurant, he knew it. Not just as someone powerful, but as someone celebrated. Articles had been written about him. Charities bore his name. People praised his generosity and his vision. Sundar had even shaken his hand once at a conference. How could someone like that also be capable of what the man in the coat claimed? And yet, when Sundar had seen the folder earlier, when he'd read those names and dates, a quiet part of him had believed it because he had seen behind masks before. He had learned, even as a boy, that not everyone who smiled at you wished you well. A sudden noise behind him snapped him out of his thoughts. A car door slamming. Voices. He ducked into another alley and pressed himself against the wall, listening. Two men had stepped out of a black sedan at the end of the street. Their heads turned slowly, scanning the sidewalks. One of them muttered something into a phone. They were looking for him. He slipped farther into the alley, his shoes quiet on the wet pavement. At the end of the alley, he spotted a narrow stairwell leading down into what looked like an old service tunnel. Without thinking, he darted down the stairs, his hands brushing against the rough, damp walls as he descended into darkness again. The tunnel was cold and smelled of mold and rust. Water dripped somewhere in the distance. He kept moving, his heartbeat loud in his ears, his breath fogging in front of him. After what felt like forever, he emerged in another alley on the other side of the block. Here, it was quieter. No one in sight. He leaned against the wall for a moment, finally letting himself breathe. His hands were shaking now. His jacket clung to him, damp from the mist and sweat. But just as he started to step forward, a figure appeared at the mouth of the alley. It wasn't one of the men from the car. It was the waiter. He stood there, his face shadowed, his hands shoved deep into his pockets. You weren't supposed to take the envelope, the waiter said quietly, his voice carrying easily in the still night. Sundar's blood ran cold. He opened his mouth, but no words came out. The waiter stepped closer, his eyes glinting faintly in the dim light. You think you're different, don't you? That you're better than us? But you don't understand how this works. You don't understand what you've stepped into. Sundar straightened, trying to find his voice. Why? He finally managed to say. Why were you laughing at me that night? Was it all just part of this? The waiter stopped a few feet away, his expression hard. Then he laughed, but it wasn't the mocking laugh from before. This one was bitter, hollow. I was laughing because I thought you were harmless, the waiter said, just another quiet man who would eat his dinner and leave. But then you left that envelope. And now you've made yourself a problem. Sundar clenched his fists, though his voice stayed calm. What happens now? The waiter tilted his head, studying him. You have two choices. Give me the envelope, walk away, and never look back. Or keep it and lose everything. The silence that followed was thick, heavy. The fog swirled around them, and somewhere far off, a siren wailed. Sundar took a step back, his hand instinctively resting over the inside pocket where the envelope was tucked. He thought of the man in the coat, bleeding on the rooftop yet smiling faintly at him. He thought of the names in the folder, the photographs, the quiet suffering written between the lines of every page. And he thought of that boy he used to be, standing barefoot in a dusty street, clutching a book to his chest, dreaming of a better world. When he finally spoke, his voice was steady. I'm keeping it, he said. The waiter's jaw tightened. For a long moment, he simply stared at Sundar, his eyes dark and unreadable. Then he let out a slow breath and shook his head. Then you'd better run faster than you did tonight, he said softly, and with that, the waiter turned and walked away. Disappearing into the fog, Sundar stood alone in the alley, his heart hammering, his body trembling, but his resolve unbroken. He reached into his jacket, pulled out the envelope, and opened it again, reading the name one more time. This time, he didn't just see a name, he saw a challenge. But before he could slip the envelope back into his pocket, his phone buzzed. He glanced at the screen. Another unknown number, a single message appeared. You chose wrong. Then another. They're already inside your apartment. Sundar's breath caught in his chest. He looked up sharply, his mind already racing, and without another thought, he turned and ran toward the street, the city lights spinning around him like stars. But somewhere deep inside him, he knew this was only the beginning. Betrayal in the quiet streets blurred past as Sundar ran, his shoes splashing through shallow puddles, his breath hot in the cold night air. Headlights swept over him as cars passed, but he didn't stop, didn't even slow. The words from the message still pulsed in his mind. They're already inside your apartment. Every corner he turned, every shadow he passed, felt sharper now, alive with danger. He didn't know exactly who they were yet, but he knew what they wanted. The envelope, the name inside it, the proof he carried close to his chest like a fragile, burning secret. When he finally reached the street where he lived, he slowed, staying to the edge of the sidewalk, his body pressed against the walls of buildings as he approached. His apartment building rose in front of him, 3 stories, old brick, a single dim light above the entrance. It looked the same as always, quiet, harmless. But as he stood there watching, he noticed something. A black car parked across the street, engine still running, no one inside that he could see, but the faint trail of exhaust curled into the air. A second car farther down, dark windows, and they're just barely visible through the blinds of his own apartment window. A faint shadow moving across the room. His pulse quickened, but his mind stayed clear. He backed away slowly and slipped down a side alley, circling around behind the building. He knew another way in. Years ago, he had noticed a narrow fire escape at the back, nearly hidden by ivy. He'd never used it before, but tonight it felt like the only option. He climbed silently, the metal cold under his fingers, the rungs slick. At the third floor, he paused outside his own window and peeked through a crack in the curtain. Asterisk. 3 men were inside. I sat casually in his chair, flipping through a folder. Sundar recognized instantly the folder the man in the coat had given him on the rooftop. Another man stood by the window, watching the street. The third was at his desk, typing something into Sundar's laptop, his face lit by the glow of the screen. Sundar's stomach nodded. How had they gotten the folder? And why were they still searching if they already had it? Then he noticed something else. His notebook lay open on the floor, pages scattered, and his phone sat in pieces on the table. They were dismantling his life piece by piece. He crouched lower on the fire escape, breathing quietly, thinking he couldn't go in. Not yet. He needed time, but as he backed away, his foot slipped on the slick metal and a faint clang rang out into the night. Inside the room, the man at the window froze, then turned sharply toward the sound. He's here, one of them muttered. The man at the desk grabbed the folder. The man by the window drew something from his coat. Sundar didn't wait to see what, and they all moved toward the door. He slipped back down the fire escape as quietly as he could, then dropped the last few feet to the ground and ran. He didn't stop until he was 3 blocks away, his lungs burning. Finally, he ducked into a doorway and leaned against the wall, trying to catch his breath. His phone was gone, but the envelope, the original envelope, was still tucked inside his jacket. They hadn't found it. Not yet. He pulled it out and opened it again, staring at the name, as though hoping it would somehow explain everything if he just looked long enough. But it didn't. It only raised more questions. Why had the man in the coat chosen him? Why? Had the waiter been involved? Why was this name this celebrated? Powerful man, at the center of it all. A faint sound pulled him from his thoughts. Footsteps, deliberate, unhurried. He looked up, and his breath caught in his chest. The man in the coat was standing at the end of the alley, leaning heavily on the wall, his left arm wrapped in a bandage now. But he was alive. You're tougher than I thought, the man said quietly, his voice rough, tired. Sundar stared at him, his mind spinning. You made it out, he said, though it sounded more like a question. The man nodded faintly. Barely, but you. He trailed off, studying Sundar with something like admiration. You've already gone farther than I expected. I thought you'd hand over the envelope by now. I thought you'd walk away. Sundar straightened, though his hands still trembled slightly. You said once I opened it, I couldn't go back. You were right. The man's mouth curved into a small, grim smile. You're learning. He stepped closer, his movements slower now, more deliberate. But you don't understand yet what you're truly facing. That name you're holding, it's not just one man, it's a chain, a whole network. And once you cut into it, the rest will come for you. They'll destroy everything you care about. And they won't stop until you're just another quiet story no one remembers. Sundar met his gaze, his voice low but steady. Then why did you give it to me? Why pick me if you already knew all this? The man tilted his head, as though the question surprised him. Because you, he said softly, are the kind of man who leaves a tip for someone who laughs at him. Because you still believe respect matters, even when no one's looking. That makes you dangerous to them. That also makes you necessary to me. Sundar looked down at the envelope again, then back at the man. So what do we do now? The man reached into his coat and pulled out a small flash drive, holding it out. We finish what we started. This has everything you'll need. Names, accounts, recordings, the proof that no one else has managed to get. But it's only half the puzzle. The rest, he nodded toward the envelope still clutched in Sundar's hand, is in there. Sundar took the flash drive slowly, his fingers brushing against the man's as he did, but just as he slipped it into his pocket, a sharp noise shattered the quiet. A shot rang out. The man in the coat jerked forward, his eyes wide with surprise, then fell to his knees. From the end of the alley, the waiter stepped into view, a gun in his hand, his face calm, almost sad. I told you, the waiter said quietly, you don't know what you're getting into. Sundar froze, his body screaming at him to move, but his mind still catching up to what had just happened. The man in the coat coughed, blood dark against his lips, and looked up at Sundar one last time. Don't stop now, he whispered. Whatever happens, don't stop. And then his eyes closed. The waiter took another step forward, the gun still pointed at Sundar. Give me the envelope, the waiter said. His voice was steady, but his eyes betrayed something else, something almost pleading. Just give it to me, and we can both walk away from this alive. Sundar's breath came hard and fast. Now, the envelope in his hand felt like it weighed 100 pounds. He looked at the waiter, then down at the man in the coat, lying motionless at his feet. The silence stretched between them, the fog curling around them. Both finally, Sundar spoke, his voice quiet but unshaken. "No," he said. The waiter's jaw tightened. For a long moment, he didn't move. Then another sound broke the air, footsteps behind the waiter. More shadows moving at the mouth of the alley. More voices. The waiter's eyes darted to them, then back to and then without warning, he raised the gun higher. Sundar took a single step back, his hands tightening on the envelope and the flash drive. But before either of them could move again, a voice rang out from the shadows. "Enough," it said, calm, commanding. A figure stepped forward. Someone Sundar recognized instantly. Though his mind refused to believe it at first, it was the man whose name was written inside the envelope. He was here, smiling faintly, watching Sundar like a predator who already knew how the hunt would end. The final choice of alley fell into a strange and heavy silence, as though even the air around them was holding its breath. Sundar stood still, the envelope clutched tightly in one hand, the flash drive burning cold in his pocket. Across from him, the waiter's gun wavered slightly, his eyes darting between Sundar and the figure that had just emerged from the shadows. The man whose name was written inside the envelope stepped forward, his polished shoes silent on the wet pavement. He wore a dark overcoat that fell neatly to his knees, his posture relaxed but his presence impossible to ignore. The faint smile on his face didn't reach his eyes. Those eyes were sharp and calculating, as though he was already 3 moves ahead of everyone else in the alley. He stopped just a few feet from Sundar, tilting his head slightly, studying him the way one might study a problem rather than a person. "So," he said finally, his voice calm and smooth, almost kind. "You opened it." Sundar didn't answer. His throat felt dry, but his grip on the envelope didn't loosen. The man glanced at the body of the man in the coat, lying motionless on the ground. Then at the waiter, who lowered his gun slightly, his jaw tight, his breath uneven. "You've caused quite a bit of trouble," the man said, turning his gaze back to Sundar. "And yet, I don't think you quite understand what's at stake here, do you?" Sundar's breath came slow and steady now, though his heart pounded in his chest. "I understand enough," he said quietly. The faint smile on the man's lips deepened, though his eyes narrowed slightly. "You think this is about justice," the man said. "You think this is about being right, but it isn't. It's about power. Always has been. And right now, you are holding something that belongs to me." He held out his hand, palm up, as though expecting Sundar to simply place the envelope into it. "Give it back," he said. "And this ends here. You can walk away. No harm will come to you. No one will ever know what you saw, and you can go back to your quiet little life." The words hung in the air between them. Sundar felt the weight of them pressing down, heavier than the envelope in his hand, heavier than anything he had carried before. He thought of the man in the coat, bleeding on the rooftop and whispering to him, "Don't stop now," he thought. Of the waiter's bitter laugh that night in the restaurant, the sharp pain of being mocked simply for existing quietly in a world that worshipped noise and cruelty. He thought of his parents, of his childhood, in a house where kindness was never seen as weakness. Slowly, he shook his head. "No," he said. The smile on the man's face froze, then faded. The man repeated softly, as though he hadn't heard correctly. Sundar straightened his shoulders, his voice firmer now. "I'm not giving it back. Not to you." For the first time, the man's eyes hardened. The calm mask cracked just slightly, enough for Sundar to see the fury simmering beneath. Behind him, the waiter stepped forward, his gun raised again. But the man held up a hand to stop him. He stepped closer to Sundar, so close now that Sundar could feel the cold precision in his presence. "You don't know who you're standing against," the man said, his voice low, dangerous. Sundar didn't flinch. "I know enough," he replied, "and so will everyone else." The man's jaw tightened. "You think you're saving the world?" Sundar shook his head. "No, just trying to make it a little less cruel." The silence that followed was thick, electric then so fast Sundar almost didn't see it. The man's hand shot forward, trying to grab the envelope. But Sundar was ready. He stepped back, tearing the seal open in one motion and pulling out the name and the flash drive at the same time. The man froze when he saw the contents in Sundar's hands. For the first time, a flicker of doubt crossed his face. "You wouldn't dare," the man said, though his voice was quieter now.